Welcome to Washington in Focus. I'm Brett Davis. Joining me today is the Center Square's investigative reporter, TJ Martinell. You authored a piece headlined, Study, Washington ranks number 8 among states for increased home value since 2016. This story is based on a study put out by the Texas Real Estate Source, and you got in touch with somebody from the Building Industry Association of Washington. Can you tell us about the housing prices in the Evergreen State, and what does it all mean?
Yeah, so the study was put out by the Texas Real Estate Source, and it was looking at states with the fastest home price increases between 2016 and 2023. And what it found, the largest increase was in Idaho. They went from $165,000 for the average home price to $369,000. So that's a 124% increase.
That's a big jump.
There was one zip code. It's the 83650 zip code located south of Boise. It had a 461% increase during that time frame.
Wow. How about Washington?
Washington homes increased from 271,000 in 2016 to 485,000 in 2023. So that's a 74% increase. Other states that experienced similar price increases were Florida and Montana. They had 77% and 78% respectively average house price increases. And what was interesting is of the top 10 states for home price increases, Western states made up 8 of them.
Oh, wow. So what factors account for Washington's jump in housing prices?
That's the interesting part, is that we can look at other states that are experiencing massive population increases like Idaho, Texas, Montana, where a lot of people from California and Washington are moving over there. Washington has had a population increase, but what the Building Industry Association of Washington is arguing is that the real reason that the home prices are increasing the way they are is because the supply is not keeping up with demand due to overregulation, due to land use zoning codes. And we have a state growth management act that controls how you can build, how many units you can build in certain areas. We have an urban growth boundary. I don't know if other states have something like that. And there's also, something that often doesn't get discussed is the geographical constraints. I mean, a very desirous place in Washington State is Western Washington, the Seattle area, where you have tons of hills, lakes, you've got creeks, rivers, things that constrain. Whereas in areas of Montana and Texas in particular, you have a lot of flat land, so you can just continue building out. You don't have to really worry about having to build around a mountain. You don't have to worry about building around hills. You don't have to worry about dealing with a lake that constricts. You have to worry about shoreline stuff. These are problems that other states don't have to deal with. But on top of that, you will also have a lot of regulations in our state that restrict how many units you can build.
And I understand one of those is energy codes that go into effect later this year. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so they make energy codes that, for example, there's one where should you be allowed to use different types of heating sources. There's also whether you should be required to use a heat pump as part of your heating and cooling. Now, heat pumps are very relatively inexpensive to use, but they're expensive to install, whereas other heating units are cheap to install, but they aren't as efficient energy-wise, so that they consume more energy to achieve the same desired temperature, so they cost more money.
I would imagine that adds to the cost of building homes.
Yes. And then there's, discussions about banning the use of natural gas in new construction and requiring the use of electricity. With the urban growth boundary, within it, you can build 4 to 6 units, maybe more, depending on housing units per acre. But when you're in the rural area, on the other side of that line, you could be within 200 feet of that same area. You can only build 1 to 2. And also, for builders, they want to recuperate their costs. So what's more economically feasible is for them to build a very large house that's worth $3 million, just throwing a number out there, and sell that instead of building 2 homes that are only going to sell for a combined $1 million.
I see. It all comes down to the math.
It comes down to the math, but also if you have to build 2 houses, you've got to run in the infrastructure for both houses. You got to get the electrical in, you got to get the plumbing in, you have to get the sewage in, you have to have that all hooked up. That all costs money.
So simpler to build one house instead of multiple houses?
Yeah. And so other places in the country like Idaho and Montana and Florida, they may be experiencing home price increases despite the fact that the supply is keeping up relatively, but they're just experiencing such massive population increases. If you look at like Idaho, that $369,000 is still much, much cheaper than a house in Washington State. The houses were cheaper. When we talk about price increases, we're talking percentage wise, but in terms of the amount increase, I think Washington State, if you actually crunch the numbers, is roughly around that amount.
Okay. Now, is there any sense of this? Is this going to get better or worse in the upcoming years? Or housing prices going to go down, or are they going to keep going up?
Interest rates are really going to impact it to some extent, but from what I've been seeing is that housing in Washington State, unless there's some massive change in terms of the supply or the demand drops, we're probably not going to see the prices go down. We're not going to see 2012 prices where you could buy a home in Bellevue, Washington for under $300,000.
Right, those were the days.
Indeed.
All right. Well, this will be something to keep an eye on. Thanks for keeping us in the loop. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com. For TJ Martinell, this is Brett Davis. Please subscribe and thanks for listening.